Yeah, I'm gonna follow up on some of the talk on describing how meditation can be also used to investigate altered state of consciousness. And I will have a particular focus on what's called deconstructive style of meditation. And I will try to do as much as possible parallel with the psychedelic research. And I will extend and continue the presentation of Chris and Evan on the neurophenomenology and the importance of first-person data in this line of research. So I think in meditation it's particularly relevant to understand that meditation in that context can be also understood as first as a tool. So it's through the training of different techniques, the participant gain some kind of first-person expertise in becoming more reflexively aware of thoughts, emotions, and learning to explore the nature of perception, emotion, attention, and so on. So you can really, for me, it's a paradigmatic case study to investigate neurophenomenology. So the first point is why we study meditation, because it has some epistemic value to study consciousness. And that's this notion of mutual constraint. So the first person is going to help us to understand the brain, the physiology. And compared to the psychedelic literature, the type of perturbation that we have is more induced by the set and setting. So for instance, the fact that you maintain this intensive retreat, when you remain still and maintain the same intention moment after moment, that creates a specific setting that's going to perturbate your usual mindset. So it's more it's a different form of perturbation. So it's not only a tool, but it's also a way to ask specific questions about consciousness. And I'm going to present here a taxonomy of a different meditative stage and how they can help us to understand or interrogate the altered state of consciousness. So this framework is really theoretically inspired by more like Buddhist practices, in particular the Mahamudra and Dzogchen framework, but it's I think can be applied in a more general context. And here the focus is really on the structure of consciousness. And so it's quite simple, but I think it can really explain really the four stage and four kind of a level of training in contemplative practices. So the first one is kind of our mundane, normal way to engage with the world, and you can see that it's a state when we are really oriented by absorbed by the content of appearance. So it's really an absorption into the content of experience, but there's some kind of subjective feeling and meta-awareness, but it's minor. And then you start. The first stage is to cultivate this one-pointed focused attention. I will present in a second, but through that techniques, what you gradually develop is a capacity to suspend and to be less absorbed by the thoughts, emotions, and you develop a stronger sense of meta-awareness and a sense of agency as well. And gradually you do this other style of practice called open monitoring meditation, when you start to gradually release even the control of the mind and just remain this kind of open awareness when you don't control the mind, but you just cultivate this sustained awareness of experience moment after moment without being taken away by what's appearing in your mind. And through that practice, you can transform and regulate different cell schema. And the later stage, which is less studied scientifically, but start to be really, I think, over the last 5 years, become extremely, I think, a new topic of interest is what's called Nondual awareness practice. That's or open presence meditation. That's cultivated in different traditions. particularly in this case, the Mahmudra adduction. And here you gradually develop a capacity to lessen and even suspend the sense of duality subject-object. And the claim is that you then reach a state when there is no subject-object duality, and it's this kind of sense of space. Awareness is not spatial. It's this kind of open epistemic field that Chris mentioned and that we investigate with this long-term practitioner. So Chris described that state on Monday. So this talk, I'm going to try to give you an illustration of different paradigms that we use to capture the different stage and also trying to identify the cognitive mechanisms that are at play. And at the end, I will try to provide a theoretical framework to understand them. Okay, so that was the 4 states. So the first one, which is the most basic practice that has been studied extensively in the West over the last 30, 40 years, is a form of mindfulness or focused attention meditation. And you can use a metaphor of the anchor. It's really like you orient your attention to a chosen object. It could be the sensation of the breath. And then you remain in physical stillness. And then you are just going to monitor moment to moment whether your attention is on the object or not. And it's actually just a tool to become aware of all the automatic spontaneous pattern of the mind, and that you can then learn to regulate, so in particular distraction, disturbing emotions, and so you cultivate this kind of non-judgmental attitude when you can just observe them without engaging with them. So that would be the first stage, and I'm not going to present it too much today, but the key idea is that it's the targeted state is what you're really trying to control or regulate is this notion of experiential fusion or cognitive fusion, which is the sense of being lost into experience. Same way when you go to see a movie and you're totally lost in your movie, such as you're completely disconnected with your environment. So that's what you try to regulate with this practice. And why you do that? Because often when you are lost in the content, you can react also to the content of the mind automatically. So you try to become aware and to be able to regulate your mind. I'm just going to mention that there are now several meta-analyses that show that when you do this mindfulness-based intervention, so typically 8 weeks, you can find an effect on attention, on regulation of mind wandering, and there are also several brain imaging studies that start to identify very well the basic neural correlate of focused attention meditation, and without too much surprise, that's involved in the central executive networks, insula, and the regulation of the DMN. So I'm just going to illustrate, just to give you the intuition behind what is trained. It's an old study we've done a couple of years ago when we use an attention being task before and after three months of retreat, and it's a paradigm when you have to just to detect two targets, here 3 and 5, and often what's happened is that you're going to miss. You see the first one and you miss the second one because attention is absorbed and taken by the first target because they're going very fast. And so because attention is stuck in the first one. And so we hypothesize that after this training, you will be better to disengage and optimize how much you regulate your attention. And indeed, is what we found after this training compared to control. You find that you're better capable to be aware of both targets, and that change is related to a reduction in the P3B, which in response to the first target, which is a marker of attention allocation. So you're better at controlling how much attention you engage with a stimulation, so that, such as you're better at monitoring the rest. So that's just an illustration of that first family of meditation, and now I'm going to on this second. So another aspect of these practices is that once you're trying to gain control about your attention, you can then start to engage in an exploration about what they call the nature of perception. Is your thought permanent? Are they change and so on? And in particular, an important construct. So it's this notion of deconstructive family is that you can try to get insight about the nature of perception and emotion and cognition. And the targeted mechanism, we think, is this notion of cognitive reification. I'm going to briefly present. So in meditation, you're going to cultivate this a sense of dereification. So it's a capacity to recognize that, so in literature you can also call cognitive diffusion. It is capacity to recognize that the degree to which thoughts, feelings, and perception are phenomenally interpreted as mental process rather than as accurate depiction of reality. So if I ask you, for instance, to give you a first-person understanding of that construct, if you look at this strawberry, for instance, and try to imagine as being real, so just take a second, just as if it's really in front of you, you can grasp it and eat it. Can you try to do that? And then, could you raise your hand in case, I mean, it's a bit fast, but in case some of you have a sense of salivation in your mouth. Okay, so even if it's you know it's a trick, you know it's all of that, but simply by engaging and doing as if it's real, there is a simulation that's trigger an automatic reflex, and that's really what we are targeting with this this deconstructive family, is the recognition of that reification process, what's called sometimes subjective realism. And so we, in some study, we in our group, we try to contrast this kind of self-simulation, like I described, with this a mindful observation when you simply monitor the cravings, the food appetencies that you have, your emotions that follow all of that, and we ask subjectively how the person feels with this simple manipulation when they look at food images that are appetizing, that are neutral or attractive, and they report that when they are totally immersed, there is a sense of craving, stickiness, less meta-awareness, and more sense of reification. And while you do this mindful observation, there is a reduction of that. Interestingly, when you manipulate these two things and you measure salivation, you can see that the more you were self-absorbed into these things, the more you have salivation compared to the mindful condition. Then we also use as a paradigm a food approach behavior task, and we found that when you're totally absorbed into these things, and you do the task after that, this food approach task, the more you were absorbed into the image, the more there will be a bias in your cognition during the food approach task, meaning that reification of the things is going to bias your perception. And that was predicted also by how much salivation you had. So we also measure EEG, and we find change in attention. So but that's just an illustration of a core construct in our work, is this notion of dereification that is, we think, is a core mechanism to explain the clinical effect of mindfulness, for instance, on depression, which is one of the most solid findings. In the same way, you can learn to dereify in particular when you have recurrent thoughts that are very disturbing. You can learn to suspend the sense of being real and solid. Recently, we tried to test the idea that sense of reification actually could be also conceptualized as an automatic form of affordances. So the mind is actually a certain model of reality, and when you perceive something as real, it triggers a certain form of affordances. And so mindfulness or this open monitoring should decrease these automatic affordances. And so we test this idea by binocular rivalry task. When you present images with high affordances, like a teacup, like that, and then you reverse and you compare to a grating. And we've done that with a long-term practitioner versus novices. And we look at how much there was a change in the duration of the binocular rivalry. And indeed, we found that there was in open monitoring, you could reduce the duration of the images with high affordance compared to the neutral one. And interestingly, we found that feeling of affordance is correlated to specifically some mu oscillation that are related in the motor cortex, motor electrodes here, that are predicting when you have a high affordances, low affordances, and that's while the posterior alpha oscillation is really related to the duration itself of a percept. So we can start to detect correlate of that sense of reification. So as I said, the purposes of altering the content of your mind is as some clinical importances, in particular for emotion regulation. So in our group, we work a lot on pain regulation, physical pain, and we repeatedly found that through this style of this decentering, of this cognitive diffusion, that's predicting this capacity to dereify is predicting how much you can decouple the sensory component of pain, so from its affective response, how much is bothering you. So meditation doesn't really change how intense it is, but how much it is subjectively felt as being it's bothering you. So that is sensory pain uncoupling. And so we repeat in an fMRI, and as that's during a retreat, when we just ask people to rate after each 8 sessions a day. During 10 days, they rate just many scales like Evan did. And here in particular, we look at pain intensity and pain unpleasantness. And just throughout the retreat, you can see gradually there is, across 50 participants, there is not only a reduction across the retreat, so that's 10 days, a reduction in pain intensity, but also a much faster decrease in pain unpleasantness after a couple of days. So that's an illustration of that first styles, and I'm going to just present now the non-dual awareness practice. So it's much more, there are less data available, and I think there is an interest to present, to study this type of states and to compare to the state of ego dissolution, for instance, in 5-DMO DMT. And I'm going to present just one example of. So that's from the group of Aviva Birkovic. They did a succession of studies when they look at long-term practitioners, meditators, that describe a specific style of practice that led to a sense of ego dissolution. So they did different training in this practice, and then they develop a qualitative interview when they look at the change in terms of perception of the self, in terms of agency, in terms of meta-awareness, and so on. And so they managed to detect, to assess the degree by which there was this ego dissolution during the practice. And then they did 2 MEG experiments. The first one, they just look at this ego self-dissolution in the scanner. And one of the core findings was a decrease in beta oscillation in the medial region, frontoparietal and medial region. And the more the people express a sense of being have this openness and ego dissolution, self-dissolution, the more there was also a decrease in beta oscillation in the posterior part of the brain, medial posterior part of the brain. So then they predict that ego dissolution should also have some regulatory function. So they apply a paradigm that we developed in the past on death avoidance. So it's a mismatch paradigms when you see your faces morph with the face of other, and in 3 contexts, either a negative image or with words related to for death or neutral words. And what we found before is that when there are novice participants, when it's a condition of death, and you look at your faces, there will be a suppression of the mismatch, and we interpret it as a self-defense mechanism. And interestingly, with this group, you don't see in this kind of death condition, you don't see a reduction or a suppression of the mismatch. And so that suggests that there is there is more death acceptance in this group following the training. So that's just an illustration. And I'm going to just briefly mention that there is now, like in the literature on psychedelic, a lot of interest to try to develop a mechanistic and theoretical understanding of meditation. And there is also an interest to use, for instance, the predictive coding and active inference approach to conceptualize the effect of this different style of meditation. So here is an example. So it's different proposal in the field. I'm just going to mentioning one from the group from Ruben Laukonen and Ellen Slachter that use the same our typology of these 4 states. And it's a nice illustration about how they conceptualize that, how these 4 stages can be understood from an active inference viewpoint. So what you can see here is a kind of hierarchical organization in the brain. So it's a predictive hierarchy, or also what they call temporal depth or counterfactual depth. It's essentially the organization of the hierarchy in the brain from the sensory aspect to the most abstract one. And also the most abstract one is involved in this narrative self, involved thoughts and time traveling and so on. And so what you see when it's blue, when it's red, it means that there is a high precision. So it's so in this framework, mind modeling could be understood as a deployment of high precision, or so you emphasize with high confidence the prior which are high in the hierarchy, involved in particular in time travel or self, the narrative self, and when you do focus attention, there will be a decrease in confidence, or a release in the confidence in some higher order prior, and with a higher precision to bodily signals. So through attention, you deploy your attention more on the lower part of the hierarchy, and so you increase the confidence or the gain into the bodily signal, bodily prior, that will be here. And when you're in open monitoring, you gradually also decrease the content of the mind. And then for them, the non-dual will be a form of so I think it's very speculative, but it will be a state when there is a collapse between the foreground and background of the mind, and you have high precision in all the levels. So I think it's still very, very speculative, but I think it's nice to test something I would just... and so if you want also, that provide a way to understand also now neuroimaging in a much deeper way. So if you have an interest, it's a recent paper we published this year, when you can understand that through that framework also you can relate in a principal way the description of the person and translate some of this physiological category or invariant into a computational language that can be then translated in a computational terms. So I don't have time too much to go into detail, but the point is that with this type of model, you can also describe not only the content of the mind, but also the metacognitive processes, and that's so you can start to really express also how the agent could guide the identification of certain parameter in the model. So if you're interested, you can look at this paper. But for the rest of the talk, I will just translate that framework into a mismatch paradigms that we test, where we try to look at whether the focus attention meditation will have a different impact on the mismatch negativity than this open monitoring, open presence states. So essentially, focus attention can be understood as increasing the sensory precision and increasing prior formation, while open presence is a suspension of high order prior, and so should decrease the mismatch. So we test this idea with this very basic oddball paradigms when you look at standard tone, and that's can be a proxy for the can be interpreted as with a Bayesian as a reflecting an error prediction from a Bayesian viewpoint, and so from that framework you could make a prediction that in focus attention for both novice and expert you will have a high mismatch, and that will be reduced in this more like open monitoring meditation, And so, in brief, we did find some of that effect. So it's hard to unpack it briefly, but it's a triple interaction when you have, on the one hand, the experts. The expert is here and the novice here. And the key message is that in focused attention, you do find a strong mismatch for experts that's different from open presence and a control condition with reading. And so you can see that the open presence and reading both has a reduced mismatch. But they also differ in an early attentional potential, so a marker of attention. So while open presence has this a stronger orienting response, the reading condition, which is more an absorption state, doesn't show that. So you can start to have a way to disentangle specific process produced by the different states of meditation using this framework. And we found different brain correlates. So in terms of oscillation, so compared to the literature on psychedelic, in meditation, we tend to see an increase in alpha. So it's more active states, and that's what we found, that when you compare a reading condition, for instance, to a focused attention and open presence meditation, you find an increase in frontal alpha. And we also find a specific effect of expect only on the frontal gamma in non-dual awareness. This is still an open question. So another group from Tononi's lab found actually a decrease in gamma. So I think it's still debated. We at the time we did not separate in our analysis the oscillatory aspect from the noise, the 1F power law. So it might be that there are differences also in the type of analysis we've done, but the take-home messages, I think, is that meditation tend to increase actually alpha compared to psychedelic, and gamma is still an open question in the meditation world. And I will just finish just to show a paper in preparation. When we try to replicate some of the work that Chris Timmerman did in psychedelic, when they look at this connectomic measure. So this gradient that look at the functional organization of the brain, and I don't have time to go into detail, but the take-home. So you measure with this gradient, you can look at the in a very systematic way about the brain along a gradient. In particular, the first gradient reflects the hierarchy of the brain. So, for instance, the DMN is at the top of the first gradient, the sensory cortex at the bottom. So when you look at a measure of this gradient, we replicate what Chris and his group found 2 years ago, that there was a contraction in this gradient, suggesting a higher integration during this state of open presence compared to matched novices. So for this particular metric, we seem to find some overlap with the ego dissolution found in the psychedelic literature. So I will just give you a brief summary. So I tried to illustrate a different style of meditation. And so the most popular one, the kind of mindfulness style, attention-based, that's core mechanism is to regulate the cognitive fusion, so how you absorb into experience. While the deconstructive meditation try to down-regulate two aspects of the mind. First, the content of experience. So that's this notion of the regulation of cognitive reification, and that illustrates how it regulates affordances, affective impulse, and so on. And it also, in a more advanced form of non-dual meditation, this deconstructive practice tend to also try to suspend or deconstruct bodily self-process itself. So like in psychedelic, there are different conceptualization of meditation as a down-regulation of the precision of prior deployed through attention control. That can be deployed at different level of the hierarchy, of the predictive hierarchy. There is not necessarily a congruence between the deconstruction meditation and the psychedelic literature in terms of neurooscillatory response. So meditation tends to increase alpha activation, but there is apparently a decrease in psychedelic. And by the way, I think it was interesting to know that the long-term practitioner who did both DMT and meditate actually maintained a very high alpha power during the DMT. So I think there is an interesting research question to understand here. And I try to present some preliminary data suggesting that there is some potentially a common marker of in terms of connectomic measure, in terms of brain integration during this non-dual form of meditation. That's it. And I want to thank our group in Lyon and thank you for your attention.